Hello everybody. This is lesson 3.8, solving systems algebraically, but this time we're using the elimination method instead of substitution. When you eliminate, you basically take two equations, two equations, and we're going to add them together to eliminate one of the variables. Because remember, we can't solve when there's two variables, so we somehow have to get rid of one of them. So here, if I add these two equations, they're set up nicely already. Notice how the x's are lined up together. The x's are lined up, the y's are lined up, and the constants are lined up. So it makes it really nice. Okay, so I'm going to add these up, and look how my x's are going to cancel out. When you have a negative 4x and a positive 4x, that just equals 0. So those get canceled out. And then I add my y's. I'm going to draw my line here. I'll get a positive 6y when I add a negative 2y to an 8y. And a negative 12 plus a negative 24, that's a negative 36. Okay, so now we only have one variable left. We can solve for y. We just divide by 6 on both sides to get y by itself, and y is negative 6. Okay, so that's one of our variables, and just like substitution, once you have one, you need to plug it in to find the other one. So you can choose either one of these two original equations. I can use this one or that one, whichever you prefer. I'm going to go ahead and plug it into the bottom one. So I'm going to rewrite it first. The bottom one says 4x plus 8y equals negative 24. And when I plug in negative 6 for y, don't forget to write everything down that I've written down so that you can follow your notes later. Okay, I'm going to go with this. 4x plus 8 times a negative 6 equals negative 24. Well, we have 4x, and I have a positive 8 times a negative 6, which is a negative 48. Notice how that plus sign disappeared. All right, and then I will draw my line so I can see what I'm doing here. I know I need to get everything away from this x on the left-hand side, so I'm going to go ahead and add the 48 to both sides. Okay, I'll have 4x equaling, well, a negative 24 and a positive 48 equals a positive 24. Divide by 4. X equals 6. So we have our x is 6 and our y was 6 and our y was negative 6. So if I were to go ahead and plug that back in for my check, notice I wrote down the original equation, the top one, and I plugged in 6 for x and negative 6 for y. You guys already know how to do this. You just make sure that both sides are equal. Well, 4 times negative 6 is negative 24. So I get this. And here I have a negative 2 times a negative 6, which equals a positive 12. No more negative there. And then negative 24 plus 12 is a negative 12, which equals negative 12. So that side worked. Then I go ahead and check my other one. So 4x plus 8y equals negative 24. That's our second equation, right? I'm checking both equations to make sure it works. All right. Plug in 6 for x and negative 6 for y. I get 24. It's 4 times 6 is 24. And then positive 8 times a negative 6 is a negative 48. And when I add those two up, I get negative 24. The right side already said negative 24. I'm not going to check every single one, but I want you to see that's how we can check it to make sure we have the right answer. Just to let you know, not all of these are the same. There are a little bit a couple different steps, so just watch the whole video, please. All right, number 2. We are going to solve this the same way. Okay, notice how the x's are nice and lined up here, and they're going to end up canceling out if I just add these two up. It's already set up for us to eliminate. Okay, so when I add this up, I get 0x, and then I'll get, write this here, 8y, and 2y is 10y, equals 20 minus 3 is 17. Some people like when I say it 20 plus a negative 3, same thing. Okay, and let's see, I'll divide. Sorry, I'm just noticing that this wasn't going to come out even, but that's okay. It's no big deal. We're going to solve for y. We're going to divide by 10 on both sides. You can do that on your calculator. 17 divided by 10 is 1.7. Of course, when we have a 10, when you're dividing, you're just moving the decimal point over one spot, and that's where you get it. All right, so y equals 1.7. We just need to find x. I'm going to go ahead and use the top equation. I like that one better. Has less negative signs. So 4x plus 8y equals 20. I'm going to go ahead and plug in my y. Okay, so 4x plus 8 times 1.7 will equal 20. Now we can solve for x since there's only one variable again. 4x plus, let me get my calculator here, 8 times 1.7 is 13.6. Okay, now that I'm solving, I'm going to draw my line. I know I need to get everything away from the x, so I need to subtract 13.6 first. And that's going to be a 6.4 over here. 13.6 is cancel out, and 4x on that side. Now I can just solve for x by dividing by 4. So x is going to be 6.4 divided by 4, which is 1.6. So when we're done, don't forget we write it as an ordered pair. The x is 1.6. The y was 1.7. Let's do one more like that. Hopefully this one will come out as whole numbers. Okay. This time, it's not the x's that are going to cancel out. It's going to be the y's, which is fine, as long as you have one variable cancel out. So if I add these up, you can see that a negative y and a positive y will equal 0. So they cancel out. So now if I'm adding down, this is a 1x plus 2x is 3x. I have my equal sign here. 11 plus 19 is 30. This one comes out nice and even because when I divide by 3 to get x by itself, x will equal 10. Okay, you already know the second part. That part's easy. I'm going to use the top equation this time. Again, it doesn't matter which one you use at this point. X minus y equals 11. If I plug in the 10 for x, always be very clear as to what variable it is when you solve so that you know which one you're plugging it into. All right, so we have 10 minus y equals 11. If I want to solve, I need to get everything away from the y. Don't forget this is a negative 1y. We're going to subtract the 10 because it's positive. We need to get rid of the 10. Oops. All right, we're left with a negative 1y. That's where everybody makes their mistakes. They forget the negative sign. Equals 11 minus 10, which is 1. And now we need to divide by that negative 1 to get y by itself. So y is going to be 1 divided by negative 1, which is just negative 1. So we have our x was 10, and our y is 1. Okay, so let's do one where they're not all set up to go away. And I'm going to skip number 4. So that was 1, 2, and 3 we just did. We're going to skip number 4. We're going to go to number 5. So if you see this one, they're not set up to cancel out. If I add this up, you don't have to write this down right now, just watch for a second. If I were to add this up, I would get 6x plus 18y equals 48. And that doesn't help me because I didn't cancel out one of the variables. So I can't just add these up yet. But there is something I can do. You can see how the y's both have the same coefficient. Well, I want the same coefficient, but I want opposite signs. I want one of these, either this one or this one, to be a negative, and that will make them cancel out. So what we're going to do is take one of the equations. It doesn't matter if you take the top one or the bottom one, and we're going to multiply it through by a -1. And all that does is changes all the signs. So let's do it to number 1. So the first equation. So I'm going to rewrite this over here. I'm writing an arrow. Draw that like me. Okay, so we're just changing all the signs. So the positive 2x becomes a negative 2x. The positive 9y becomes a negative 9y. And of course, you still have to do it to the side. A positive 25 becomes a negative 25. Don't forget your equal sign. Okay, so that's all we did. All we did is multiplied everything by a -1 because, you know, 1 keeps the number the same and the negative sign just changes the sign. The second equation I'm going to keep the same. I'll write keep here so you know we're keeping, and we'll write over here we're multiplying by a -1. That looks like x minus 1, but understand we just multiplied by a -1. Actually, here, why don't we write it like this? Go like this. That looks more like multiplying by a -1. Okay, so the bottom one stays the same. It's still a 4x, lining everything up. It's still a 9y, positive 9y, and it still equals a positive 23. Now when I add them up, my y's are going to cancel, and I can see what I have left. Negative 2x plus 4x is a positive 2x equals negative 25 plus 23 is a negative 2. Okay, to solve for x, just divide by this 2 right here to get x by itself. So x will be a -1. Once we have x, we can get y. I'm going to use one of these original equations. Okay, I'll just pick the top one. 2x plus 9y equals 25. And do write down everything I write, please. That way you can follow your work later. We'll circle this x, and we'll point that to the x in this equation because that's what we're doing. We're plugging it in. So this is 2 times a -1 plus 9y equals 25. Now we can solve for y. This is -2 plus 9y equals 25. You want to get everything away from the y. So let's add the 2. Cancels those out. 9y will equal 25 plus 2 is 27. Right? Divide by 9 to get y by itself. Y equals 3. All right, and we have x is -1, y is 3. So -1 for the x, 3 for the y. You can circle that as well, but I like to circle my final answer. Okay, let's do one more like that. Number 6. As you can see, if I were to add these up, so nothing would cancel out, right? We're not writing this right now, you're just looking. So the y's are not going to cancel each other out. 1y plus another 1y is 2y. That doesn't cancel them out. 8 minus 3 is 5x here. And this would be a 11. So that doesn't cancel anything out. So what we need to do is multiply through by a -1 to either equation, it doesn't matter. Let's do the bottom one this time to be different. Okay, so the top one we're going to keep, I'll write the word keep here. So that's going to just be exactly the same, 8x plus y equals -16. Okay, so this time we're going to have to change this one, which we're going to multiply by a -1. So that just changes the signs. So from a -3x, we're going to change the sign to be a positive 3x. Instead of a positive y, we're going to have a negative y. And instead of a -5 on the other side of this equal sign, we're going to have positive 5. All you're doing is changing the signs. Now we can add them up, because now the y's will cancel out. This positive 1y and negative 1y goes away. That's 0. Okay, so 8x and 3x is 11x. -16 plus 5 is a -11. And we will need to divide by 11, and I just realized that I did something wrong earlier, but it had nothing to do with the problem. I'm sorry. All right, when I say divide by this, I get x equals -1. Okay, once you have x, find y. It doesn't matter which one you use. I'm going to go ahead and use the top equation. If you want to use a different one to see if it comes out the same, go right ahead. So 8x plus y equals -16. I'm going to plug in the -1 for the x. 8 times -1 plus y equals -16. This is -8 plus y equals -16. Since I need to move stuff, I'm putting my line. I need to move the 8 to the right to get y by itself. Okay, so I have y by itself now equals -8. So I have -1, I'm a -8. And that's how you do it.